Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Cameras and Coffee, where we have a very pooped Steinbeck. Yes, we do, because yesterday we celebrated 1 year of having Steinbeck with us. So we took him on a 9-mile walk, on which we stopped at Lamar's Donuts, where Steinbeck got an original glazed and a blueberry cake donut. Yes, you did. And then for dinner, he got a 1.5-pound London broil, which I think he pretty much earned walking 9 miles with us yesterday. Yes, he did. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about cameras and drink coffee. Well, today, coffee leaf tea for me. Exciting news, finally, an announcement out of Pentax, well, out of Ricoh, about Pentax. And I'll tell you what, these guys are really good at keeping secrets. This thing's been in development for a long time, and we've had very few meaningful leaks on it. So well done on the Ricoh engineering team for not talking about this incredibly exciting camera. So from Digital Camera World, which is where I saw the first announcement, some very interesting things about the Pentax K-3 Mark III. 1.6 million ISO is how the article's headline starts, and that is right off the bat hugely exciting. That's a very high number. I'd like to see the performance before I go crazy over it, but yeah, that's a very high ISO number, and would be very exciting to see what the images from that look like. But more importantly, I don't expect 1.6 million ISO to be returning images that you're going to be printing at poster size. I tend to think of super high ISOs as having a use for framing up composition in extremely low light situations. That's how I use them anyway. So for instance, if I'm out doing astrophotography and I can't look at the back of the screen and just see where the trees or the mountains or lake or whatever are and whether or not everything's perfectly lined up. So I'll take like a 5-second shot at the highest ISO, and that'll allow me to tweak any of the camera alignments that I need in order to get the real shot. That's where I think the benefit is. 1.6 million ISO basically means instead of a 5-second or something like that shot, it might be a 1-second shot or a half-second shot. So it speeds that process up slightly. It could also be good for black and white conversion if it's noisy, freezing motion. At any rate, so 1.6 million ISO is exciting. However, one thing this article doesn't say, and one thing I haven't found anywhere, is what the maximum shutter speed is going to be. If it's sticking at 1/8,000th of a second, that kind of limits the range in which you can use higher ISO. And another reason that high ISO is really exciting is that it tends to indicate that at the lower end of the high ISO range that you're going to get better performance out of the camera. So if they're comfortable kicking this sensor up to 1.6 million ISO, then that means something in the 25 to 50,000 range is going to perform meaningfully better than it did on the previous generation and definitely 2 generations ago of cameras. So I guess realistically, the most important thing about that high ISO headline is that the implications that it has for other extremely high ISOs being more usable. At any rate, if something like an ISO 25,000 is usable in theory, on a regular basis, it doesn't say what the maximum shutter speed is anywhere that I've found. So that's sticking at 1/8,000th of a second. It doesn't make a huge benefit. It doesn't have a huge benefit, the ISO rating, for daylight shooting, if that makes sense. It does mean also, if let's say that the maximum shutter speed is 1/8,000th, or if it's 1/24,000th like the KP, which would be very exciting for this camera. If you're going to use time and sensitivity priority, or is it time and sensitivity, time and aperture. There's so many different modes, I forget the names of all of them. If you're going to set your camera to auto ISO and manually input the shutter speed and aperture, and then just keep those fixed for, say, sports shooting, and let the camera get a proper exposure with the ISO setting. That super high ISO setting is beneficial for getting higher quality photos in that setting. So at any rate, long and short of it, they probably have really good confidence in how the sensor is going to perform at higher ISOs. Also, 4K recording, exceedingly exciting there. Finally, good to see that. Their Shake Reduction 2, which is out of the Pentax K1 Mark II, is rated at 5 stops in lab testing. In real world use, that's probably 2.5 to 3 best case scenario. But that's still really good. If we're talking about 3 stops of shake reduction, that means if you can normally handhold at 1/60th of a second, that's 1/8 of a second that you can get handheld with a usably shake-free image. That's a heck of a lot of difference. 12 frames per second, which is pretty decent. 101 autofocus points, 25 of which are cross-type, with autofocus down to -4 EV. Probably on the -4 EV, my best guess is going to be that that's under the best case scenario in good conditions with a fast lens. I'm going to guess that -4 EV with an f/5.6 lens is really pushing the capabilities of the AF. But if you had -4 EV with, say, the 85mm or the 50mm 1.4 lenses that Ricoh's just released in the last year and 2 years ago, that's probably much more likely. The Viewfinder is hugely exciting. We've talked about that on this channel before, with a 1.05x magnification. The previous 2 iterations of the K3 had a 0.95x. So increasing that. So the Viewfinder is important for those of you who only use mirrorless, or who don't use the optical viewfinder on your digital SLR, or who have never shot a film SLR. That viewfinder magnification is really important because it's very important for critical focusing, especially with manual focus, or even with verifying focus with your autofocus on. So if you can take what's going into the sensor, into the prism, and you can magnify it to make what the eye sees through the viewfinder larger than what's on the sensor, which is what this viewfinder is doing by a factor of 5%, then it makes it easier to obtain critical focus. So that prism tells us that Ricoh is very focused on having a top-tier traditional DSLR, and good for them. There will be a market for that, and there will continue to be people who want to shoot that. It also means that for people who need critical focus, like if you're shooting portraits at a large aperture, or if you're doing selective focus work, things like that, then being able to get that fine focus manually or verify it with autofocus through your optical viewfinder will be a whole lot easier with this viewfinder. Macro work, things like that, again, very easy to obtain more precise focus. So the whole point of that viewfinder is that it really increases your ability to use the optical viewfinder as a hugely beneficial tool to your photography. One major downside is that there's not going to be an articulating screen. And that's unfortunate, because if shooting video, you're not going to be looking through the viewfinder. You're going to want to look at the screen. And often video especially requires different angles for the camera, low or high, whatever it is. That's just a whole lot easier if you've got an articulating screen. Plus, shooting down low at the ground is really easy with an articulating screen, and shooting up above your head as well. So that's kind of a huge disappointment. I'm sure it was a decision based on cost, mechanical complexity, camera size. I would imagine, and probably some other things I haven't thought of, but those things are probably major drivers in why the camera does not have an articulating screen. It does have 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 4.2, so that's really good, and dual SD card slots and all of the things you would expect from a flagship camera at this point. So the Bluetooth 4.2 is really exciting. It will make it easier to connect to your computer. My guess would be that you'll be, if it were me, if I were an engineer working at Ricoh and said, what can I do with this Bluetooth? Firmware updates would be a big one, because that would just be really easy. And another one would be, of course, file transfers, or using Bluetooth to set up the camera as a wireless webcam would be really useful, or wireless recording. I don't know if Bluetooth has enough bandwidth to do 4K. At any rate, but it could definitely be a perfectly fine conference call camera in that, with that. So at any rate, lots and lots of things that they could do with that. And of course, they could also use the Bluetooth to communicate with the smartphone if they put together a really nice and actually usable and enjoyably usable control app that you can use on your phone to control your camera. The Digital Camera World article does not indicate anything about price, so I kept looking around and I found an article from New Atlas, which has a video at the beginning. Is it linked at the beginning of this one? I think there's a link in here somewhere. Anyway, here it is. Yeah, so there's a video at the bottom of the article. And interesting watch, of course. The article says that availability and pricing information will be closer to the release date. Release date's going to be sometime in February 21. The video reveals that Ricoh expects the K3 Mark III to be priced in the upper 200,000 yen range, which means that in US dollars, it's going to be around 2,500-ish. And that should be around 2,100 euros if I'm doing the conversion in my head correctly today. So in terms of APS, if that price point is correct, in terms of APS-C cameras, that's really expensive. I think the K1 was $1,800 body only when I bought it. So if that's a $2,500 body only APS-C camera, as amazing as it sounds, there's going to be a pretty limited market for that camera. That's really steep. If you had asked me 2 days, 3 days ago before I found that article, what I thought the next K3 would come in at price-wise, I would have said around $1,500, which is less than the K1, bit spendy in terms of APS-C cameras, but on par for the build quality and what the capabilities were likely to be. $2,500 it's a bit of sticker shock, to say the least, because I was really excited about seeing if I could get my hands on a camera, one of these, to do a video series about and to test out and take photos with. I definitely am not going to buy it at that price point, unfortunately. So anyway, if it came out a year and a half from now, we'd be in a different position. I would buy it. But anyway, doesn't make the camera any less exciting. It has been 5 years in the making, because the K3 Mark II came out in 2015. And so looks like a lot of work and effort have gone into making what is unarguably an incredibly impressive camera. And I'm really looking forward to it hitting the market, and I really hope that it does well, because a camera that has got the specs that the Mark III has and the build quality that Ricoh puts into all of their cameras definitely deserves to do well, because you can just tell, damn it, you can just tell when you use a camera how much time and energy relative to other cameras has gone into really developing a fantastic product. And the 5-year lead time is a big hint, but Ricoh always puts in a ton of really good work into their new cameras. So at any rate, even if I don't get a chance to buy that one, at least not new, it's a very exciting and interesting camera. So that is our camera news for this morning. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And hopefully Steinbeck will be working tomorrow instead of sleeping. Isn't that right, Papa? Yes, I know you're tired. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you up. Have a good day, everybody.